So the next segment of the program is focused on the Nerem medal. And I'm happy to introduce my great colleague and friend, Ross Ethier from Georgia Tech Emory to kick it off. Ross?
Great. Thank you so much, Andres. You said it's 30 minutes for this section? Great. Okay, perfect. So I'm so pleased to be able to stand here with you and talk to you about our friend Bob, and specifically in the context of the Robert N. Nerem Education and Mentorship Medal. And I was just having a wonderful conversation. We all saw different slices of Bob, and this is maybe a slice that some of you might not know about. So I'd like to share that with you now. So I need to start by telling you something about the ASME Bioengineering Division. ASME is a large professional society. And within it, we have this bioengineering division, has some 2,500, 3,000 members, something like that. And Bob was intimately involved with that division. He was the chair of the division. He served as the associate editor and then editor-in-chief of the ASME Journal of Biomechanical Engineering, which is the main journal that the division puts out. And he even chaired the board of editors of ASME, which has oversight over all ASME journals. And one of the things that we have in that division is medals for people who have done very good things. There's an early career award, the Mao medal, the Listener medal, and the Savio Wu Translational Biomechanics medal. And if you're in the biomechanics and mechanobiology world, you know that you know these names, and these are the people who really were the giants of our field. Or in the case of Savio, is still a giant in our field. And that was the situation as of 2017. And we thought, Bob Nerem's name is missing off of this list. And so we were very fortunate to be able to create a medal in Bob's name. And I was very lucky to be able to announce that actually at a meeting in 2017. And as you can read here, it's for extraordinary and sustained level of lifetime achievement, and the focus is on education and on mentoring. And so I think we all know that Bob was a remarkable educator and mentor. And how did he do that? And I think we need to talk a little bit about that. So we've heard a little bit already about the fact that Bob traveled a lot. In fact, it's kind of a delicious inside joke here in the IBB that we have an award for a trainee called the Nerem Travel Award, right? And nothing could be more appropriate. And for those of you who are out of town, this is an aerial view of the Atlanta airport. And every time I went to the Atlanta airport, I said, Bob, I was in your wing. They were asking after you. They said they hadn't seen you for 2 days. When are you going to be down there again, right? So Bob traveled a lot. Bob was everywhere somehow, and he knew everybody, and he just knew everything. I did want to show you this one historical picture because I love this photo. It's got a lot in it. Y.C. Feng is the gentleman on the left, and that first medal in our division is named after Y.C. Feng. The lady in the middle is Rachel Caro. That's Colin Caro's wife from Imperial College, and then Bob, of course, on the right. And this is when Bob was actually at Imperial, becoming a bioengineer, I would say. And I love the fact that we have two people who medals are named after inside a single picture. Now, we've heard a little bit about the Nerem rules of life, and I just wanted to share two parts of the rules that I think are really important and relevant to the mentoring story. The first is if people think that you care, they will care about what you think. And as a leader, you care about those that you are leading and make sure they get the credit. And that was Bob writ large, I would say. And also each of us is unfinished, a work in progress, but even so more than we seem. Look for the good in people. Try to imagine the world as it seems to the other person. And that was Bob writ large too, unquestionably. So this is my favorite picture of Bob. It was taken in his office just in the hallway there. And this is absolutely quintessential Bob. And it's quintessential in a couple of ways. So I like to come in early in the morning, and I would often walk down the hallway there, and I would poke my head into his office, and he was sitting there with his cup of coffee, surrounded by his piles of paper. You're only seeing a small part of it. Susan, part of the admin assistant load was actually dealing with the email. Bob was not a fast emailer, but he knew where every piece of paper was in that office. It was amazing. And I would poke my head in the door and I would say, Bob, do you have a second? And I just wanted to talk to you about something. Like, I want some advice on something. And he'd go, sure, Ross, come on in. And we would have just the most wonderful discussion. And I would always come out of that room feeling wiser, better, and just somehow my heart just got a little bit bigger. And, I'd like to believe that, I was somehow special. But actually, Bob did that for everybody, right? You all experienced that. And that's one of the things that made Bob so, so special. And of course, let's not forget Marilyn. And some of you don't know this, but when Bob was editor-in-chief of the SME Journal of Biomechanical Engineering, the person who actually did the work is Marilyn right here. So Marilyn, we love you. So who has won the Nerem Medal since it was announced in 2017? Here's a list of the recipients. And the first winner in 2018 is Roger Camp from MIT. And I think that is so perfect because those of you who know Roger knows that he embodies all of those amazing mentorship qualities that Bob embodied as well, and teaching qualities. So with that, I would like to invite Roger to come up to the stage and say a few words.
So Bob was a remarkable individual in so many ways. But to describe all my memories of life with Bob would take a book. And in that book would be many, many fond memories of time spent with Bob, and often with his lovely and loved companion, Marilyn. You two were a team in everything Bob did, and your friendship with Judy and me was an integral part of our relationship with Bob. But my focus here is on the Nerem Medal for education and mentoring, which I was honored to be the inaugural recipient. This award had deep meaning to me because my close relationship with Bob, but also because I always viewed Bob as my mentor, my role model, my educator, and my sage advisor. And Ross, I think like you, everybody I think feels the same way. They had this special relationship with Bob. But like you, I benefited from, like many of you, I benefited from Bob's guidance and advice, both personal and professional. I learned from him, or at least I tried, and did my best to live Bob's rules of life, which have been posted outside my office for years now. So there's no award or recognition that could have meant more to me than receiving the Nerem Medal. After all, education, mentoring, are two of the most important roles for those of us in academia. In many respects, our success or failure as researchers or educators hinges on our ability to mentor our students and how to progress through numerous professional and personal challenges. The success of our academic offspring reflects on us and our lab environment. Bob Nerem epitomized the traits we all strive for as educators and mentors. His academic family is large and very appreciative. Let me give just one personal reflection on one aspect of mentoring, and that being communication and caring. As most of you know, Bob wasn't a big fan of long emails. His preferred means of communication was the phone. Yeah, I remember many long conversations with Bob, mostly about EBICS, our NSF-sponsored center, but on a variety of topics. At one point, probably 5 years ago, during our EBICS adventure, Bob and a few others were together. We were discussing a difficult issue into the evening. and we'd gotten stuck, and we needed help from our NSF program manager, Zoe Rastigar. And Zoe, I think, was going to be here today, but I haven't seen him yet. So Bob soon said, let's give Zoe a call. So he took out his cell phone, called Zoe, and after a brief social interlude, Bob got to the point, resolved the issue immediately. The direct personal contact was always Bob's preference, and he used it often and effectively. So in preparing my words for today's symposium, I kept thinking of conversations I'd had with Bob. Some things I'd always meant to say, but for whatever reason, didn't. And how I longed for another chance to see and enjoy the company of my dear friend. So it seemed natural for me to end my remarks today in the form of a letter to Bob, wherever he may be. So, dear Bob, or should I say Uncle Bob, because that was the way he was known to all the people in EBICS, and I see Sarah smiling back there. As you no doubt recall, your memory was nothing short of remarkable. We first met soon after you joined the University of Houston as department chair, long before you wound up at Georgia Tech. You had invited me down to give a seminar during my early days at MIT and to explore the possibility of my joining you in Houston. Theme seems to be recurring here, doesn't it, in recruitment? By that time, you were already widely recognized for the role you played in unraveling the interactions between vascular biology and fluid mechanics. The uniquely high degree of collegiality found in the field even today owes much to your efforts to foster it, as well as the example you set through all your personal and professional interactions. On many occasions, I sought out your advice, certainly in connection with our shared research interests in multicellular engineered living systems, but increasingly in your later years, I went to you for, I guess, what I'd call life advice. I knew I could always come to you with a problem, no matter how big or small, professional or personal, and get your always honest and always helpful guidance. Bob, I appreciated that more than you probably ever knew. Of course, we all recognize the many and varied contributions you made to our profession. Early in the context of a cell's response to shear stress, and much later in the emerging field of multicellular systems, and most recently in Engages, a program designed to recruit minority high school students into bioengineering that you helped initiate and then nurture along. And we're going to hear a lot more about that later on today. Yours was a life with many aspirations and as many successes. I know that Engages was one of many. You were a man of enormous talents, a huge heart, and a grateful following. We miss you, Bob. I'm going to end actually with a written comment from one of my colleagues at MIT, who unfortunately couldn't be here due to health reasons. Many of you probably know Forbes Dewey. And Forbes asked me to read this at the symposium today, and the organizers fortunately allowed me to do this. So this is from Forbes. I'm sorry that I cannot join you in person on Friday, July 29th, the day we honor the key role of Bob Nerem in accelerating the adoption of engineering principles to medical problems. While he was neither the first nor the most spectacular contributor to biomedical engineering, he played a dominant role in moving the field ahead from 1974 to his death in 2020. Our lives are truly richer for his contributions. We also need to recognize the key contributions of his wife and life companion, Marilyn. When a critical decision about medical imaging was being made, or different treatment approaches were being argued, often in their living room at the end of a stressful day, it was Marilyn who managed to calm everyone down and find the right solution. Here's hoping that the next generation finds their Marilyn Nerem. It's absolutely critical. Thank you much.
I wish I could be with you there personally in order to help celebrate Bob's life and professional accomplishments. But unfortunately, many months before this date was set, we had reservations for an extended trip several thousand miles away from here. But I am happy that there's a virtual opportunity to be with you. And what I'd like to do in my few comments is not to go through a recitation of all the many great things that Bob did and his awards, but maybe just to share a few brief personal stories about Bob. First of all, he and I had a lot of similarities in our background. He was just a few years older than I, so I always looked to him as being my senior. But we were both aerodynamicists. We both did research in hypersonic flow. We both developed an interest in blood flow in arteries. And then we took slightly different directions in research, but we overlapped a lot. Now, one of the things that we had in common very early was we both used hot film anemometry, a velocity measuring sensor in aerodynamics, to study blood flow in arteries. Bob had published a very nice paper on using hot film anemometry in horses. Several years later, my group used hot film anemometry to study blood flow disturbances in dogs. Now, I submitted a paper from our group to Circulation Research. It was rejected. This was disappointing, but there's a good outcome to this. I was going to attend a meeting that Bob had organized, and I thought, I'll bet Bob Nerem was a reviewer. So when I got to the meeting, I spoke with Bob. We talked about the review. He was very receptive and very encouraging about the work. Gave me some good suggestions about how to reanalyze the data to extract more information, which I did. Paper was accepted, and that led to a fairly long research activity in poststenotic flow disturbances that resulted in a number of papers, resulted in a number of PhD theses for my students. Now, the second story relates to how I met my really long-standing collaborators in hemodynamics and atherosclerosis. Bob had organized an NSF workshop on hemodynamics and atherosclerosis, which I could not attend. But there was a book of abstracts that resulted. And so I was looking for collaborators. At that time, there was not much opportunity to work with people at Emory. The interest in engineers working with medical doctors had not developed at that stage. So I took the book of abstracts, I went through and prioritized the reports from different groups. And out of that, I decided to call the University of Chicago. Cy Glagoff and Chris Ahrens. And when I called, they were really receptive. They said one of the reasons we went to this conference was so that we could perhaps meet up and collaborate with engineers. And of course, that connection, which I owe to Bob Nerem, led to a long, productive research program in hemodynamics, atherosclerosis, atherogenesis, and so forth, which really meant a lot to my career. Now, the third story has to do with how we recruited Bob Nerem to come to Georgia Tech. There was a small group of us in those days, Ajit Yoganathan, Ray Vito, John Brighton, and myself, and a few others, who were trying to develop bioengineering at Georgia Tech. Pete Petit made a very generous donation to fund an endowed chair in bioengineering. And our group decided we wanted to use this chair to try to attract someone with really national stature that would come to Georgia Tech, help build the program, and take off from there. That summer, there were some series of meetings in Europe that I attended, and Bob was there, and Maryland. So we used that as an opportunity to try to, I could play a role perhaps in recruiting Bob to Georgia Tech, answer questions, try to convince him he should come to this little fledgling operation that was going on. So we traveled together quite a bit. I was in the car with Bob in Maryland a lot as we would drive from place to place to place. I was not only trying to recruit Bob, of course, I was trying to recruit Maryland because they were a good duo. And at any rate, that was not the only thing, of course, that resulted in the success of having Bob come to Tech. But I did enjoy playing a role with that. And of course, Bob came, he accepted the Petite chair, subsequently engaged with Pete, developed more and more into the Petite Institute. Here we are today. And after that recruitment of Bob, there was a reciprocation. I went off to Hopkins. I was there for about 5 years, and Bob was one of the key people in recruiting me back to Georgia Tech. The team here had done so much during that 5-year period. Things were growing like crazy. They wanted to start an academic department of biomedical engineering. And I was so excited to come back, rejoin the team that had developed over the years, and try to work on creating this new academic department between Georgia Tech and Emory. So we had a wonderful time together at a personal level. Yes, there were professional things that Bob accomplished, but each of these stories that I've told exemplifies some of Bob's characteristics. He was extremely collegial. He was collaborative. He was a pioneer and a builder, nationally and internationally as well as locally. And he was a wonderful mentor. Bob loved working with young people, and I'm sure you'll hear more about that from others about his work with FACES. So Bob, thank you so much for all you've contributed to the field, to people, and to me personally. And Maryland, we will miss Bob. We all do. But I know you will miss him more than any of us. You were a big part of the reason that Bob was so successful. So thank you. I wish that I could have been with you, but enjoy the celebration.
Hello everybody, I'm Sheldon May, one of the original members and old-timers from IBB and before. Thank you very much for this invitation to speak at the symposium in honor and memory of Bob. We were very close friends and worked together for many years. I was thinking that perhaps the most valuable thing I can do is to tell the story for the new generation that's here at IBB and at Georgia Tech of some of the early years of what was the milieu at Georgia Tech before IBB, in the years before and in the beginning, so that you can understand really what a transformative effect the establishment of IBB and Bob's actions, of course, and other faculty had on Georgia Tech. So sometime after World War II, maybe in the 50s and 60s, the Board of Regents had made a deliberate decision not to build any bio-related activities, at least bioscience, at Georgia Tech. It was going to be physical sciences and engineering. And when I arrived at Georgia Tech in the early 70s, there really was no bio presence at all from the point of view of biochemistry, molecular biology, any of the biologically related sciences at Georgia Tech. I remember that I ordered the first fermenter here at Tech, and they gave me a lot of trouble in purchasing. They thought I was going to make beer, and so forth and so on. It was a small, the chemistry department had a history of having people involved in natural products research, but that really was as biological as it happened here on campus. There was no PhD program in biology. In fact, in subsequent years, it was the chemists that became active in bio-related areas that really worked hard to establish the biology PhD program. In any event, there were a few of us, a small group that came in the early 70s, started to do biological related research in chemistry, and we organized ourselves into a biochemistry division, and we started to develop courses and work towards having a PhD program, a PhD track within the chemistry department for biochemistry. We other developments were happening at the same time in the bioengineering side, and I'm hoping that other people here on the symposium will talk about that. There was a nascent bioengineering program, a bioengineering PhD program was being developed, and we certainly knew some of those people, but we really didn't interact with them in any meaningful way in a research sense or in collaborative work. Don Giddens and others were some of the early people, Yoga Nathan and so forth, some of the people which I'm assuming will be here at the symposium. So how did I meet Bob Nerem for the first time? So I bought we set up a cell culture laboratory in my research group, and it was the first one in any of the science departments. Maybe there was something like that in biology, but not anything certainly in chemistry. And we were having terrible problems with contamination of our cell lines. Somebody mentioned that there was this new guy, Bob Nerem, who had just come to the engineering schools of engineering, mechanical engineering, I guess, and he was this expert or had an experience in cell culture and in tissue culture. He had experts in his lab that knew all about it. And so I invited Bob to come and talk at our research group meeting, and so we could meet each other. He came and he spoke and was very open and very helpful and offered to help the graduate students in my group that were having trouble. Went over and learned some of the techniques from him, and we were able to successfully get our cell culture working in my lab. Bob and I knew each other just peripherally, and then we both were speaking at a symposium at the American Institute of Chemical Engineering meeting in Los Angeles the next year. And we reacquainted ourselves with each other. We spoke, we were there, and we thought we might develop a collaborative research project. We discussed this at that meeting. We came back and we actually did that work together, and that was resulted eventually in the one and only paper that Bob and I ever published together. In any event, that was how I first met Bob and how we first interacted with him. The subsequent years, beginning in, I think that the most important point was that in around 1988 or so, a group of ad hoc faculty from both the biosciences, mostly chemistry, biochemistry, and engineers began to meet informally and start talking about setting up some sort of a collaborative arrangement. It was a group of people who had to see if we could get some common interests, and we would meet periodically, not quite once a month, maybe once every other month, and somebody would talk about their research, and we saw whether we could develop further to have collaboration. We actually morphed into, I guess, what would be called the virtual IBB. Let me just read a couple sentences that I actually wrote when Jerry Gallo wrote a history of IBB. And I said what was unique about the Petit Institute is that it existed as an entity before there was a physical presence. It was a grassroots effort among the faculty who brought the administration along with them. But we were functioning as a collaborative unit before we had any physical presence or proximity. This is what gave the Institute its culture. It was an interesting moment in time when people who were collaborative in their outlook were willing to share. It was something we all felt. And I think that was really the essence of the origins of grassroots effort, which then eventually became, of course, IBB. The president of Georgia Tech at the time set up a task force and a committee. Bob and I co-chaired this, and the end of the result of the committee was a recommendation that is set up an institute for interdisciplinary bio-related research, bioscience and bioengineering at Georgia Tech. And of course, then the IBB was created. Bob was named as the director, and I was the associate director, a position that I held for more than 10 years from that time and through the beginning of IBB. I'm sure that much of the history of the bioengineering side, the magnificent contributions of Pete Petit, the bioengineering program, the Whitaker Foundation, and the beginnings and development of the Emory Georgia Tech collaboration, those will be mentioned by others. And those were obviously key points in the development of IBB. But I wanted to tell the story about the establishment of IBB really and how it transformed, give you some appreciation of how it really changed the culture and the nature of the presence here of bio-related work at Georgia Tech, which has now expanded into so many other areas. I think we all owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Bob Nerem for his many contributions, his leadership, his willingness to share and to mentor young faculty and enthusiastically and with optimism. And I think that the fact that he was collaborative in nature and willing to be open to other points of view made IBB work. It was certainly not at all clear in the early years that this would really have a presence and have a long existence at Georgia Tech. There were those who were very doubtful. Not everybody came along with us willingly, but I think that we made this happen in large part, not only Bob, but the other people there, but certainly Bob was a tremendous leader in that. So it's an honor and a pleasure to have this opportunity to share these thoughts and memories, recollections in this symposium in honor and memory of Bob. We who were there in the early years and mid-years even miss him a lot, but I think that his legacy is very clear, and the history and future, the history of IBB is really tremendously expressed. It's very just something that's very unique, and we developed with the Georgia Tech nature, and I think the future is very bright. And I hope that everybody will enjoy the symposium and their memories of Bob. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to make tribute to Bob Nerem. When I first started out in graduate school, I was recruited by Bob to the University of Houston, where he was department chair. Instead, I chose Georgia Tech. But after this, Bob thought hard about coming to Georgia Tech instead of staying at Houston. Bob did come to Georgia Tech approximately 6 months after I did, and we have had a long history together. He had an amazing memory and could remember everyone's face, name, and telephone number, and all of their family members. He proved this to me by noting my telephone number at Georgia Tech, 894-6827, and then choosing for himself the number 894-2768 as an inversion of mine when he chose his own telephone number. Over the years, we have worked on many projects together, but two stand out. The first was the National Science Foundation Engineering Research Center for Tissue Engineering, which at the time was the largest grant by NSF. Bob was a big thinker, thinking in terms of strategy for the future instead of just what is the next experiment. He could see that the field of tissue engineering was just being born and that engineers should have as much contribution to this field as biologists. So we developed an ERC with three major components: cellular techniques, scale-up manufacturing, and testing in living systems. Due to the evolution of the field, the first component of cell technologies commanded all the attention during the ERC. But even today, the engineering issues of scale-up manufacturing and good living systems models to demonstrate efficacy and safety remain as the major technical hurdles for tissue engineering. Bob had the knack of seeing far ahead. The other project we worked on together was the IBB building. When Bob first came to Georgia Tech as a senior professor, of course, the administration promised him significant new lab space. Then Bob went on to propose to the Whitaker Foundation a large grant for a small new building. Although this did not quite work out at the time, Bob then lobbied the GT administration for a landmark building, the Institute for Bioengineering and Biosciences. He convinced the president that the future of biology was too big for engineers to ignore. Bob raised multiple millions from Pete Petit to make this IBB a reality. The building is innovative for many reasons. It would be interdisciplinary without being owned by a school or department. This was quite radical, but contributed to the interdisciplinary research in the space. We also visited several buildings at other campuses to try and see how they organized their building. But then we came up with something new. We make the wings interdisciplinary with different labs interacting and the space being flexible as the projects grew or shrank. Since the departments did not control the space, the director of IBB became very powerful as he controlled the space. Bob always knew how to gain power. 2, make the architecture for communication. All the PIs pass each other and all the students pass each other, even on the way to the bathroom. As you can see, people from different floors, something no other buildings did. We went so far as to having landings so you could meet others halfway, which is really a hallmark of the building. And third, the building has artwork that represents IBB and tissue engineering. Bob had this vision from the beginning and commissioned the huge painting in the atrium. Bob has left many legacies to our community. I hope this highlights a few that are personal to me.
I'm happy to call up Ajit Yoganathan, who with Bob was a key person making what we have now here. So Ajit, careful, I can get my biomaterial.
Thank you. Marilyn, it's known you for over 35 years. Bob, wrong about this a little bit longer. As I was driving in this morning, I was thinking, what am I going to say? I got 8 pages of notes, but it's all over. But I thought I would go back to when I first met Bob. As a second-year graduate student in chemical engineering from Caltech, I attended a 2-week NATO workshop on cardiovascular engineering in Houston, Texas, organized by Ned Wong. And during that symposium, there was a Professor Nerem who got up and talked about sticking these probes that Don Giddens mentioned, hot film probes, in the coronary artery of horses. It just totally horrified me because I was doing work on heart valves, but using laser techniques on the bench. So I had the opportunity to get up and go and talk to Bob. He was very open, and he suggested, maybe you can look at heart valves in horses. And I said, well, that maybe when I become a professor, do that. Things change because I think today it'd be very hard to do those kinds of studies in animals. But this meeting really set the stage for me, meeting Bob. Don Giddens was there, Larry McIntyre, and a few other people there. Then let's fast forward to I met Bob after I came to Georgia Tech at a couple of meetings in Europe. And unlike many of you here in the room and many other people who were recruited by Bob, I helped with Don and Ray Vito to bring Bob and Marilyn here to Atlanta in '86, '87. One of the things that I think is important to mention, you've heard a lot about Bob's impact on the national scene, but how did he impact Georgia Tech? Bob negotiated a really great recruiting package. He recruited for common space, something that never had been done at Georgia Tech. And he also asked for multiple faculty lines, not from mechanical engineering per se. At that time, John Brighton, who was the head of mechanical engineering, was a bioengineer himself. But Bob negotiated with the dean of engineering, Dean Sangster, for multiple lines. And out of that, he hired people like Cheng Zhu and Tim Wick, Thanasis Sambanis, both chemical engineering. And this was the start of multidisciplinary research. He also negotiated space on the 3rd floor of SST. And as was mentioned, he also became, at that time, the editor of the journal. And Marilyn's office was down the hall from mine. And every morning I would walk by, talk to her. She would be handling these papers to be mailed out. The other characteristic with Bob during these early days was I would walk by his office, sit down and talk to him. He would have a cup, his McDonald's visit, his cup of coffee, and his egg McMuffin. But all he ate was the McMuffin, not the sandwich, because he was on this Atkins diet or South Beach diet, I don't know whichever one it was, but he would, and this was his ongoing practice. but the conversations I had with him very eye-opening. The days we had in that SST building, Peg Gerard is here, who was the lab manager, who was the cell culture expert at that time, probably the one that Sheldon May talked about. Another person who was there as a young researcher, and today he's the head of cardiology at Emory, Bob Taylor. He was there training as a fellow, I would run into him, and today the man is there at the top. Bob's ability to hire people was incredible. His next step in enhancing bioengineering faculty here was with the Whitaker Development Award. And as part of that, he also got faculty positions committed to by the upper administration. And from that came people like Bob Goldberg, Andres Garcia, Mark Prausnitz. So we were beginning to build up the cadre of people. The creation of IBB, as Sheldon May mentioned, was due to, I think, sort of a far-reaching thing of the president at that time, Pat Creasine, who suggested having this ad hoc committee of looking at the intersection of life sciences with technology. And out of that came the idea from that ad hoc group, which I was part of, to create IBB. And I was asked to chair the committee to look for the first IBB director, which turned out to be Bob. They come in 1995. We looked at the opportunity of a new building, as President Clough mentioned, and here we are today, 20 plus years. In 1999, this building was opened. Bob's ability to do that had tremendous impact. IBB has grown tremendously, and even that experiment in 1987-88, where we had faculty from mechanical, chemical, aerospace, engineering in a single building was the initial creation, I think, was the fertilization of creating interdisciplinary institutes, IBB being the first, and now we have, I don't know, 6, 7 IRIs that really got Georgia Tech into interdisciplinary research. On a personal note, I traveled with Bob a lot. I enjoyed that. And due to him, I've come close to 5 million miles on Delta. But one of the characteristics of Bob, when you travel with him, he was not someone who used a laptop. He never carried a laptop on a plane. He would sit down with his pad of paper and pencil and would write things out meticulously, in detail. And that would be his characteristics on traveling. But we also had fun. Bob knew how to have fun, whether it was locally when he had visitors or when we went out. I still remember the karaoke parties at the house in Winings, the karaoke set. Peg, you remember? He would always say, bring the karaoke set out. And he also had a lot of international students and visitors here. We were just talking about the fact that he had a whole group of French students in the late 80s, early 90s. Unfortunately, none of them are here. So Bob overall has had a personal impact on my career as he mentored me through many things as I went through and developed my research programs. As a friend, he was very close to me. I would be able to go talk to him both on professional and personal matters. And I still remember just after I got married in 1996, and my wife Tripti came over later in 1997, both Bob and Marilyn organized a fantastic welcome party for her, something that is always etched in our minds and we will never forget. And later on in life, Bob and Marilyn moved a little bit closer to us from Winings and out there in Stone Mountain. And Marilyn, we will miss Bob. Tripti and I wish you all the best. She'll be here later this afternoon, and hopefully we can continue to celebrate Bob's life as it goes on. I want to end by saying, old soldiers never die. They fade away. I don't think Bob's impact, both at Georgia Tech or nationally and internationally, will ever fade away in the field of bioengineering. Thank you.
Thanks, Ajit. Something that you said reminded me that one time Bob was in the hospital and Marilyn had run home to shower and change, and Michelle and I visited him, Bob. It was a Sunday morning. And, we sat with him and I said, okay, Bob, we're gonna take off. Is there anything you need? And he said, well, yes, could you run next door and get me a McMuffin with a coffee? And I was like, no, Bob, we cannot get you that. So great, thank you, Ajit. So Cheng Zhu is gonna do a live Zoom.
Okay, I apologize not being able to come in. I had COVID this week, so I don't want to be the one to bring COVID to others. It's really a tremendous honor and privilege to speak in honor of Bob, in memory of Bob. I am a Regents Professor and Love Endowed Chair in Engineering at the Coulter Department of Biomedical Engineering at Georgia Tech Emory. Many of you know me, but just in case some of you don't. I resent to be put in this old guys session. Look at how young I am. So this is the first meeting I had with Nerem, with Bob, Uncle Bob, in 1990. I was a research engineer at UCSD, applying for a job, and I think I was about to come for on-site visit at Georgia Tech, but I was the projectionist in the UCLA Symposium on Tissue Engineering, which is chaired by my advisor, Richard Scala, the late Richard Scala, and Bob was the attendee. And Bob came, looked me up and talked to me about visiting Georgia Tech and trying to sell me how Georgia Tech would be. And so that was our first meeting in Colorado. Now, this is a AI enhanced close-up of that. So I can look it up, the name tab, to make sure that was the UCLA Symposium. This is also in 1990. That was before I came to Georgia Tech, but I was already decided to come to Georgia Tech. I had two offers at the time. One is Penn State, and the other Georgia Tech. And when I was asking advisors from the UCSD bioengineering faculty mentors, so there was YC Feng there, of course, my advisor, Richard Scala, who is here. He was the chair of the First World Congress of Biomechanics. They all kind of voted to advise me to go to Georgia Tech. And at the time, Georgia Tech and Penn State are quite comparable in terms of it's a major engineering school, and bioengineering was just started with a new chair who was on my thesis committee, and that's of course put in a lot of. He was this is Herb Lapowski. He was at Columbia with Shu Chen, and he moved to Penn State, and I wanted to recruit me there. And so like Ben Zweifach, who was Lapowski's PhD advisor and an eminent professor at UCSD, all kind of voted me to go to Penn State. But at the end, Bob was the one that convinced me, and what a decision that would make huge differences. Look at nowadays, how is Georgia Tech become, and what a fortunate and wise decision that I made coming to Georgia Tech with Bob. So Ajit, so here you see Shu Chen, here's Larry McIntyre. You see Bob here with his hand on my shoulder. It's like, I got you. So Ajit mentioned that after Bob moved from Houston to Georgia Tech, he recruited several, I think with the administration's commitment, recruited 3 assistant professors. Tim Wick in chemical engineering, Thanasis Sambanis also in chemical engineering, and me in mechanical engineering. So I was employee number 3 under the since then a long list of 100-some faculty members that recruited by Bob. And now Tim and Thanasis is not here. I am employee number 1. Okay, so right coming to Georgia Tech, I started working with Bob on organizing meetings. And the first one to organize is the 3rd US-China-Japan Conference on Biomechanics. That's in 1991. And Bob, of course, was the chair, and I was the one that do all the work for him. And you see in the picture, again, Bob, raised his glass and put it on the head, on top of my head. And you have Savio Wu here and Hayashi from Japan. Now, one of the fun thing with Bob is traveling with him. And Ajit already mentioned, I have shared a lot of the travel with him. And this is the earlier one that we had, traveling to China in 95. That's the travel that Ajit was here and Maryland in Taiwan, China. Here's Bob himself there, and Maryland dancing with Bob in this conference. And here's a close-up of that dance. Now I want to show this picture. This is post the 90s. I intentionally select most of those to be before 2000, but this one is after that, and because that's the year that I got inducted to AIMB, and I had this post bring my wife Frida here with me, and I want to show that because Bob and Marilyn has tremendous impact to not only me, but my wife Frida and our children, Elaine and Jordan. And when Bob and Marilyn come see me and Frida, he would always hug Frida, and I would say, okay, I have to hug Marilyn just to make it even. Eating with Bob. We have so much fun eating with Bob. There are parties in Bob's and Marilyn's home at Winings, Ajit mentioned, and the karaoke parties and parties at our places. And in early days, the bioengineering faculty are a small number. So when we entertain guests, and we kind of have those in people's home, and I had the honor to host some of those. And Bob will come and I would say, Bob, you are my deputy chef, because I didn't know how to barbecue or cook steak, and Bob will just take up the responsibility and cook the steak. Of course, dining at various restaurants where the chefs know Bob's name, and I got many funny stories about that. And of course, eating with Bob while traveling. Now, I want to make some more serious notes, and that's Bob guided and supported my career development in these early years. That includes supported my transition from a theoretician to a experimentalist. And that's when I come to Georgia Tech, I decided with Bob's support to start an experimental program, which now I guess I'm known as an experimentalist, and only a few people knows that I used to be a theoretician. Bob supported me to attend the Woods Hole MBL physiology course, and that's one important step so that I can do experiment biologically. Bob nominated me for the ASME YC Feng Young Investigator Award in 1992, and I got it. And this is one of the early awards that Ras mentioned. Bob supported me for the NSF Presidential Faculty Awards. in 1993, and only 2 awards has to be nominated by the university president, come out to Georgia Tech, and Bob supported me and I got it. So at closing, I would like to say thank you, Bob and Marilyn, for all that you have done for me and my family. We love Bob, we miss Bob, we'll always remember Bob. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheng. That's great. Okay, I now want to invite Lauren Williams, who's one of the early IBB folks from chemistry and biochemistry. Lauren?
Can I stand here?
Just don't fall.
All right, I'll go up there. Thank you, guys. Marilyn, I would like to give the regards of Nick Hudd, who cannot make it, but he's very sorry he can't be here and wishes to send his very fond regards to you. So I realized listening to all this actually that I kind of got screwed because I never traveled in an airplane with Bob Nerem. I never went anywhere with him, but I spent a lot of time in a car driving around Georgia with him. We were trying to set up, in the old days, research collaborations between Georgia Tech and Medical College of Georgia. We had a seed grant program, involved a lot of driving between here and MCG. So I was never in an airplane. I never got frequent flyer miles, but we did stop at McDonald's quite a bit on the way across Georgia. I guess maybe I want to talk a little bit about what Shelley May was saying. You know, Georgia Tech does not have a deep history of biological sciences and bioengineering. You know, there was really nothing here. MIT started their biology program. I think Alex Rich and some others were hired in the 50s. And there was nothing like that at Georgia Tech. And, you know, the transformation really, which started a little bit before, but really when Bob came here, what has happened at Georgia Tech is just kind of incredible. I mean, there's billions of dollars of buildings all around us that you can look back to Bob. You know, he planted that seed that sort of has just transformed this institution. I would say it's Bob, you know, Gary Schuster, Clough, Creasine. There was sort of a group of, I think, key, powerful people who just transformed Georgia Tech. And the sort of impact is going to be for way beyond our time here. You know, it's just transformed this place. It's really just an incredible story that we should all try to remember. But at the same time, Bob was like a detail guy. I can remember being on talking about the bathrooms in this building, like what color the tiles were going to be, how many stalls, et cetera. You know, people say, you know, you got to worry about the details, and Bob worried about the details, right? David Kuh mentioned we traveled around. We went over to Emory and we looked at air handling systems, buildings over there, trying to really think about what to do here. And Bob was like, I mean, he was on every detail. So not only was he like affecting science policy at the NIH and doing all this stuff, but he's the reason why we have those tiles in the bathroom. He picked those tiles. So another thing he did for us is the coffee shop here. That was the thing I really cared for when I was on this building committee, is getting a coffee shop, and Bob bought into that. And Georgia Tech Food Service has been trying to close down our coffee shop for 20 years, and Bob fought and fought. And it's going to be reopening. It got a little bit sort of shut down by COVID, but it's going to be coming back. But that's really sort of Bob Nerem's coffee shop there. Another thing that we sort of take for granted here is people have talked about the Nerem Award, et cetera, but there's also something called the Sudduth Award and the Sudduth Symposium. And I can tell you the story of that. You know, Bud Sudduth was he was an important scientist here along with Shelley May in the very early days. And he worked with Creasine, and he died suddenly, actually just before I got here. And so I ran a symposium for him in 1993, and it was just a one-off thing. I invited a bunch of crystallographers. It was a crystallography meeting. It was really dedicated to the science of Alex Rich, which is where Bud Sudduth came from. And we had that meeting, and it seemed to go well. I went over budget. I was an assistant professor. I didn't even really know money. I didn't know I was supposed to do a budget. I just invited all these people. And anyway, we had this meeting. I think the president's office ended up bailing us out. in the end. And then like about 6 months later, Bob is like, are you going on the next SEDF meeting? And I'm like, that was a one-off, what SEDF? I mean, that was and he's like, no. And he said, get going on that. And he said, I can come up with some funding. So he did that, and that meeting is still going on. I mean, that's an important part of our culture here. It's an incredible meeting that goes on, and that really comes from Bob having a vision. I mean, he sort of had a vision that, I mean, I didn't really understand all of it at the time. I mean, I thought, you know, what's this crazy guy wanting to build buildings and everything? I was just an assistant professor, but he was just amazing how he could sort of see into the future and how he could impact the future. So I would like to, you know, express my appreciation for having known him and been associating with him, and Georgia Tech. He transformed this place in such a great way, and I will always appreciate that. Thank you very much, and maybe I'm even early here, but great.
Thanks, Lauren. That was great. So next, I'd like to invite Larry McIntyre, who has known Bob for many, many years.
I'd like, it's really been a wonderful group of talks that I think has a lot of history. It has a lot of details about how much Georgia Tech has been changed by Bob. I'd like to just say a few things about some of the ways, and that's been touched on by Bruce Stromberg, and the way that, and actually Peter Katona, that was willing to spend the time to organize meetings and get people together to talk to each other about common interests that they didn't know were common. And they then realized it, and that they had great strength in the commonality if you actually used it. I first got to know Bob was when he came to University of Houston, and I was at Rice University, so we were both in Houston, and we actually put together a NSF tissue engineering ERC proposal in the mid 80s with U of H and Rice and the various elements of the Texas Medical Center, including Baylor College of Medicine and MD Anderson. And of course, it wasn't funded. And Bob came here and got one that was funded. And that was great. I think many people don't realize how much time and effort it takes to get people to come together. And I think I'm going to just review briefly a very, I think, important example of Bob's seminal role in the formation of various institutions, but in particular, the American Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering, or AMB. And as some people have mentioned, that in the late 1970s and 1980s, biomedical engineering was just emerging as an independent discipline. And every engineering society, some of them dating to the 1800s, and most material societies all had their own view of what this new area should be. This made it extremely difficult, confusing, and chaotic for program directors in government to say what we needed to have with a unified voice in regard to public policy. So Bob was willing to put together, spending an amazing amount of time in organizing meetings and getting people to talk with each other. Much of his initial work in organizing these meetings was actually handled through this loose structure of the U.S. National Committee on Biomechanics. But Bob was the actual sort of tireless workhorse in terms of organizing the meetings and see they went well. All this work led eventually, again, it's something that you have to be willing to spend the time and also to stick with it. If you think you're right, you got to be able to show that, and you have to be able to convince people that. And Bob was willing to spend the time if he thought it was right, and he was usually right. So as it turns out, and this work over 10 years, or maybe even slightly longer, led to the foundation of AMB in 1992. They had an unusual structure of this institute. Again, a lot of thought was given to this structure. There was a powerful biological group of societies called Federation for Associated Societies of Experimental Biology, or FASEB, that was very good at working with the government and getting funding for biological sciences. Bob took some of those ideas that the structure of the FASEB organization and wanted to build them into a structure for bioengineering. So the proposed structure for AIMBY included a college of fellows. That was the sort of honorific part of it, but a council of societies. So the societies that would also not see it as competition, but they would buy into it. Also, it had an academic council, so there was an academic component to it, and an industrial council, which was actually fairly small at that time. And then, of course, it had to have a central office in Washington, D.C., because that's where all the government offices were, and that's where, say, the FASEB organization actually had a small campus in D.C. I think I was involved in many of these meetings, and the process was difficult, and I'd say there are many rough spots and disagreements. And I think everyone would agree that without Bob's guiding hand and sense of humor and firmness of vision for the outcome, the process would have disintegrated back into individual walled camps. In recognition of his vital part in this vision and process, Bob was elected as the first AIMBY president in 1992 and was active in the organization up until his death. Now, after 30 years of existence, AIMBY plays an important role in providing government with information concerning the role of medical and biological engineers in our economy and healthcare system. It also provides a forum for the medical and biological industries of our affiliated societies to put forth a unified message when appropriate concerning opportunities and priorities in areas of national and international importance for this crucial field for the future. Without the relentless work and vision of Bob Nerem, AIMBY would not have come into existence. I think I'd like to just finish up by saying I was looking over slides I have that have Bob and Marilyn, and I've got a lot of slides. We did a lot of traveling to the same meetings. The one that I saw that was always sort of I felt warmest about, I guess, was when we were actually in Sendai in Eastern Japan, where Tohoku is, and one of Bob's good friends was on the faculty there, Masaki Sato. And Marilyn and Bob and Susie, my wife, and I were having breakfast at McDonald's in Japan. This is a way to experience the country. And Bob was very busy in making sure and interacting with great joy on the part of the waitress, because he was, as he always did, he interacted with the people that were serving him, and he was interested in finding out about them. And so it was sort of the epitome of the kind of things you think of with Bob. When you think of Bob, you think of all the wonderful things he's done, but you also think of Eggs McMuffins. And he had his own version of the Atkins diet that some things could vary, like maybe French fries sometimes or something. They could be meat or they could be calories. So Bob was a unique person. We all miss him, and we all miss him. And I'll stop with
School student, I would give two pieces of advice: follow your passion, and ignore the advice of your parents. Now, fast forward to someone who's a graduate student. Again, you must follow your passion, but you should ignore the advice of your advisor as far as what you're going to do with your career. Faculty like to see their students go on and be academics, but something we all have the right to do is to decide for ourselves what we're going to do with our career.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Manu Platt, and I'm up here with my wonderful colleague.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lakita Servance, Program Manager.
And it's just an honor actually coming after the chair who hired me into the department. Earlier hearing from the chair who tenured me, and then also hearing from the chair who tenured me to full professor or promoted me to full professor. So a lot of history in the space. But here today, we are here to celebrate Bob Nerem. I first walked in this building 22 years ago when I was a senior at Morehouse College to meet Bob Nerem to talk to him about graduate school. And I think about this picture and who talked about it. It took me, I didn't know it was actually a person for months. I was just looking at the different cells and wondering what the different cells were supposed to be. And I think Bob said, step back, look at the whole picture. Really slick. But today, Ms. Lakita and I, we were talking to you today about Project Engages, Bob's real love program at the end. And we are wearing our Project Engages t-shirts. So I know how to dress up. Here's my blazer. But so I love this picture because Bob was very much involved in Project Engages. And again, now we're going to use him presenting these slides at the Bob Nerem Symposium. So I'd like to tell you how it started. It started 10 years ago, summer of 2012. But it actually started in that spring. Bob was home. He was actually sick. I don't know if it was attendance or he just had a cold. And he was laying in bed and he watched this news program from Florida where they had high school students working in a lab. And he comes back in. My office was next to, or not next to his, but a few doors down from his. Comes by in the morning. Manu, I got an idea. And here it began. And so in 2012 was the first year that we actually brought in teachers from Atlanta Public Schools to come work in Georgia Tech labs here in IBB so we could get a handle on what would it be like to have young high school students working at Georgia Tech. Gotta thank Steve Woodard. Our first two schools were Coretta Scott King Young Women's Leadership Academy. Woo! And the Coretta Scott King Young Women's Leadership Academy and the Best Academy, where Steve actually, who was Bob's longtime lab manager and researcher, actually had two of his children were attending these schools to build those partnerships. And we began to then have students from the school come to work in our labs and do lab demos, science demos to build interest in our science programs. And of course, we had pizza that Bob always finds money to pay for things and for the transportation. And he always loved to actually come and talk to the students. This wasn't just have it happen and tell me about it. So you see him, of course, interrupt. This is not McDonald's. Maybe we messed up there. And then by spring 2013, we were interviewing our first high school candidates to come on campus, and they started June 1st working here at labs at Georgia Tech. That was how it started, how it's going. As the provost mentioned earlier, we've had over 140 students that have graduated. Many are first generation college students. And you can see the numbers of schools that they've been to over the years. And Lakita corrected me on this. I thought we were at cohort 8. We actually are at cohort 9. We would have been at 10, but we took a year off during the COVID pandemic. And I want to say that 2 weeks before we got started, we hired Lakita Servance. So this is me and Bob preparing all of this. And thank God we hired Lakita Servance 2 weeks before the program got started. And this is our leadership team. And the three, it was Bob, Lakita, and me, all played very different roles, but very critical roles. And then, of course, Marilyn was in the background, always contributing ideas, information, and keeping Bob on track about all of it. And so I would like to turn over to Ms. Servance to tell you what is Project Engage that we've been talking about so much, please.
Project Engages, as you may know, stands for Engaging New Generations at Georgia Tech through Engineering and Science. And Bob was always very specific in what the goals of the program were. So I'm going to read it verbatim the way he would have said it. The goal is to inspire the students to aspire to a career path possibilities in the biotech, chemistry, and engineering areas. It was always important to Bob that you knew the goals of the program. Program to be competitive, and he didn't want for the students to have to choose between economics and research. So he found a brilliant way to combine both. So as you may know, minimum wage in Georgia Tech is $7.25 an hour. We started paying the students at $10 an hour, and we have graduated to now paying the students $15 an hour. So it's about $10,000 to support a scholar each year. This makes the program super competitive, and we're very proud that Bob was able to make this happen for our students. We started out with two partners, as Dr. Platt mentioned, the Best Academy and CSK, but we have grown over the years to include more and more schools in this partnership. So as you can see here, we have built our way up to 7 schools. Funding still continues to be a challenge as far as bandwidth is concerned, but we're hoping that with more support, we'll be able to expand even more. But we're very proud of these partnerships in that we have more students who are able to take advantage of this opportunity.
And we may make it look easy. Those of us that have been around know that it's not. So we could talk more about the challenges at lunchtime. But we always celebrate the students. And so one of the things we wanted to do was to get these students to feel like they are part of this Georgia Tech community. That was one thing that when Bob was idealizing the program, he was like, we're right in the center of Atlanta. And students from Atlanta public schools are not coming to Georgia Tech. And we're a public school. We're right here. How can we make those students feel comfortable on our campus? Because that came out in our conversation with the schools. They were like, why would we go to Georgia Tech? We're not welcome there. So we really found ways to kind of have these traditions and these things to build the students in. So we have our mentor matching ceremony where they get their lab coats, and yes, there's fire that we use at the SEDAF room, and it's really cheesy but quite memorable, and we take pictures. But I love this picture for several reasons. We're not in the SEDAF room because there's plenty of us here, but for those of us that know, this is Bob's seat when we were in the SEDAF room, where he's got his notes there. Maybe he's taking notes about the science, but what is he really doing? Counting how long each person spends on each slide to make sure that they stay on time. An important professional development technique that I like to pass on to the students to finish on time. And so since Bob is no longer here, I now have taken up this seat and stand up, and we, of course, make sure that all happens.
And we invite the Georgia Tech community, we invite the family, we invite the school, we invite all of their friends, because this has made a major impact on the way that Georgia Tech perceives the students who are coming out of Atlanta Public Schools. You can see here, the room is full. We've had the support of our Georgia Tech presidents. You see President Bud Peterson there, Dr. Maria Karstoffen. And then last Friday, we were just in this same very room, and it was packed out once again as we have returned to in-person celebrations of these students. So we're super proud to keep this going, and back to you.
Oh, that's you still.
Back to me. So this picture is so important because this is actually when we were celebrating some of our first scholars who have graduated from the inaugural class. We have Robert Hughley here, who actually works at Georgia Tech, was recently promoted as a lab manager and just finished his master's degree. So we're really excited. Not all of the students, well, actually most of these students have graduated from college, but this was such a special moment for Bob and for us to see it all come to fruition and how our investment and your investment is truly paying off.
And I want to stress that too. When we started this program, we were like, hey, you just want to get these students into college. Then Bob and I quickly had to change the goal. The goal then became, how do we help these students graduate from college? Then it was, how do we help them graduate from college with STEM degrees? And now we've had students graduate, and even several have entered graduate programs, where we know we have at least 2 here in our bioengineering PhD program at Georgia Tech. And again, it started off with funding from NSF, from EBICS, our center that was led by Roger Kim, as mentioned earlier. And about 30% of the funding and support of the students came from NSF. The rest was raised by Bob. And so I worked with Bob as a researcher and a scientist. He taught me those skills. Then I learned how to be a professor from Bob. But the other piece that I began to learn from him was, how do you fundraise? Because he's a master at that. I think has been another running theme throughout. And so a lot of funding came from friends of Bob Nerem. Marilyn and Bob would host them at their house, and we would take our wonderful students, and then the people in our community would donate. And we also have friends of Project Engages. I'm gonna ask Lakita to step a little forward this way, because you can also be a part of this by clicking on this QR code, and it goes straight to a page that allows people to donate to Project Engages. But it's one thing to hear from us who run the program, but we love to hear from our students. They are actually the ones who can help sell the program the best. And I would like to introduce Clinton Smith, and I'll have Lakita introduce our other speaker, but Clinton Smith, if we weren't in public, we would be fighting, okay? No, he is a brilliant person. He had fire and energy when we interviewed him back when he was 16 years old. He has since gone on to join Project Engages. He worked in Bob Goldberg's lab with his student Brett. Then Clinton came to Georgia Tech on a scholarship that actually Bud Peterson helped get started at Georgia Tech, the APS Scholars Funds, that funds valedictorians and salutatorians, which is one of the outputs of Project Engages being on Georgia Tech's campus. Clinton graduated from our BME program this May, and he will be headed to University of Florida to pursue a PhD in biomedical engineering.
And I would like to introduce Ayana Prather. It's kind of a coincidence, but not a coincidence that both of these students are graduate from our partner schools that we initially started from, Best Academy and Coretta Scott King. We love all of our schools that we partner with, but there's just something very special about those two schools that we began with. Ayana Prather graduated from Coretta Scott King. She was the valedictorian. She is currently a senior psychology pre-med major at Xavier University of Louisiana. And with her passion in education with health equity as her goal, she loves serving marginalized patients, populations, and she looks forward to pursuing an MD, PhD, where she can combine her passion to advance individual and community health outcomes in urban areas. And I'm super proud of her because this whole summer, she was able to persevere to snag an internship at the Good Samaritan Clinic, where she's been seeing her goals come to reality. So congratulations, Ayana, and congratulations to both of you.
Come on up, come on up.
I remember my nervousness and my excitement nearly 3 years ago when Mr. Vance invited me and a few other engaged students to a secluded building somewhere on Georgia Tech, but I remember the room was gray. And even though the room was gray, our nerves and excitement made it seem just a little bit more livelier. In the meeting, Mr. Vance told us that Dr. Nerem had specifically requested us to visit Park Springs, the most luxurious retirement facility I've ever seen in my life, to present on behalf of Project Engages. And even though I was in the meeting and I nodded and I smiled, I wondered in the back of my head, did Dr. Nerem actually request us, or were they just trying to make us feel special? And I found it hard to believe initially that the same Dr. Nerem who discovered the great talents of so many, including Dr. Manu Platt, confidently believed in us, or more specifically, believed in me. But that's just the thing about Project Engages. See, when Dr. Nerem, Mr. Vance, and Dr. Platt decided on us, they didn't just throw us into these labs on empty hopes or dreams. Instead, they believed in us every step of the way, whether it was in our labs, in our classes, in our schools, on our graduation days. And because they believed in us so confidently, because they put us on the brinks of scientific research at the ripe ages of 16 and 17, quite naturally, we felt like we could do anything. And we did. And we went on and we did any and everything with a crazy amount of confidence. And trust me, it took a crazy amount of confidence to get through my pre-med courses and my MCAT. But I stand here today, and so many of us stand here today as reflections and as physical manifestations of Dr. Nerem's crazy confidence in so many students. And I'm eternally grateful that his vision and his view for Project Engages and so many students lives through me.
Well, I wanted to first start off by saying thank you to Dr. Platt for that introduction, and thank you to the IBB family for inviting us back. It's been really great to see and reflect on Bob's life and legacy through some of your testimony. And I wanted to start off by saying that I'm a little disappointed in my IBB family because no one warned me of how fierce of a recruiter Dr. Nerem actually is. I've been hearing a lot of the personal anecdotes that some of the previous speakers gave, and I'll never forget. So back when I was in Engages, Miss Lakita's office was actually on the first level, and it was adjacent to Dr. Nerem's. So when we would come in to sign in, we would pass Dr. Nerem's office, and if he was there, and if I had a little extra time, I would pop my head in and I would talk to him. And so I had the opportunity to actually develop a bit of a relationship with him. And I'll never forget at the end of my junior year in high school, he started asking me and probing me about what schools I wanted to apply to. And I started going down my list, but I noticed that when I got to Georgia Tech, his eyes lit up. And he asked, okay, so what do you want to study? And I said, biomedical engineering. His eyes lit up even more. And I think that's where recruiter Bob, or Bob the recruiter, really started to chime in. And so he started giving me the whole spiel about why I should come to Georgia Tech. And I'll never forget a few months later, once I was ready to submit my application, we talked about the idea of him writing a recommendation letter for me. And one of the days that I came to sign in, I stopped and I talked to him and I said, well, I'm getting ready to submit my application to Georgia Tech. And he's like, oh, great. So do you have all of your recommendation letters? And I said, actually, about that, I wanted to cash in that offer and get a recommendation letter from you. And I'll never forget the way he replied. He said, oh, I thought you'd never ask. And so I can't make this up. So when I walk from his office and I go up to Dr. Goldberg's lab to my desk, I open my email and he sent me a copy of the letter of recommendation. And in the message, he said, I wrote this the moment that I knew that you were applying to Georgia Tech. And when you come to Georgia Tech, don't forget your Project Engages family. And so fast forward 4 years, Bob was right yet again, and I graduated from Georgia Tech. So that's just a testament to the visionary that he is. And in the message when he said, don't forget your Engages family, I truly never forget my Engages family. Whenever I present at any conference, I always recognize Dr. Platt, Ms. Lakita, and Dr. Nerem in my acknowledgement slide. And with that, I can only end with a thank you, Dr. Nerem.
Thank you both, Clinton and Ayana. You see Mr. Vance over there. This is the goals of the program. But what I also want to just close with also is we talk about the students and their lives, and you actually they will be manning their posters during lunch or personing their posters during lunch for the latest class. But what I also saw in working with Bob on Project Engage is, number one, it was just great for someone who started as an undergrad work with him to then be his partner in this program and to learn from him on a whole other level. But it's not just that, I wasn't gonna do that either. Whew. It's not that it changed the students, it changed Bob. And the experiences that he would have by working with the students. My office was down this hallway too, and I couldn't just walk by his office without getting called in either, so I'd have to take back roads. But he would call me in and be like, hey, I was talking to one of the students. Do you know? And he would share something that they told him about their life, their experience, their reasons for being here, and what struggles they were overcoming. And he would get caught up like I would, and he'd be like, yeah. And I was like, Bob, yes. And I would know this. I grew up Black in America, obviously. But to watch him begin to have these different understandings and to push even harder for this program to be successful was just something to watch. So when they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, you can't, but he used all of his old tricks to make sure Project Engages would be successful and taught those skills to Lakita and I so that we could carry it on. So I just want to get some fundraising numbers. You know, I love that IBB has this on the website. This was Bob's favorite charity. And we've been able to raise about $269,000 since March of 2020, because that fundraising came back to me, plus all the assistance we get from others. But we do want to keep it going, and I do want to say that money goes to paying the salaries of the students and for their experiences. It doesn't go to my salary or Lakita's or just to pat our pockets. It is to have impact. And so we thank you all, and I also want to ask Luke O'Connell, who's our BME development person, to stand up. If you have any conversation you'd like to have about more complicated giving than just on the website, please see Luke. He'll be around during the break, and we do encourage you to take part of our poster session. Thank you all for this time, and thanks to Bob, and thanks to the family.